have we had you? Have we had you down? I don't know, audience. Have you read Camden?
I read for my first novel, 2010, but I haven't been back or been long.
Oh, you were, I think I might have been on sabbatical or something. Or wait a minute, I didn't start working there till 20.
No, 2016. It was 2016.
Then I was on sabbatical, I bet.
Yes. No, I don't remember you being there, but it's a lovely place. I'd be happy to come back sometime.
Yes, well, we will keep that in mind.
But send her my love. She's awesome.
I'll definitely send her your love.
Being recorded. I think Roy wants us to get
sorry. Well, I'm perfectly happy just to listen to the two of you go on about Gowanus and the other bits of Brooklyn that I love and miss. But we should probably do this other thing. I mean, we promised the people, we got to give the people what they asked for, right? Hey, everybody, how's it going? This is Roy Kesey, your cruise director once again, welcoming you to the first guest faculty reading, about which I am very, very excited for reasons that will become fairly obvious fairly quickly. Thank you for coming. Thank you also to our ASL interpreter, Alexandra. We very much appreciate your work helping to improve access to our events, especially the ones that are more public facing. So thank you very much for that. Students, I hope your first day is going well. I hope you got something to eat. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. The guest faculty readings are almost invariably my favorite part of the conference. I get a huge kick out of hearing the voices of writers I admire give shape in the air to the words of work that I love. And I love getting to ask them questions about their craft. Our two readers tonight, Paul Lisicky and Idra Novey, in that order. I will introduce them separately, they'll each read, and then we can put whatever time is left towards a Q&A there at the end. Before we get started, I would like to ask, if it hasn't already happened, and maybe it has. Thank you, Dr. Hall, for that reminder. Julie, would you mind throwing links into the chat that connect to places to buy the books of Idra and Paul? I would appreciate that very much. Those are links to one of the great independent bookstores in the country, the Ivy Bookshop in Baltimore. I hope, especially those of you in their workshops, but also the rest of you, we talk about people being great writers. They're great writers because they wrote great books. Like, that's the only way that happens. And those great books are, believe it or not, still for sale on this earth. And I encourage all of you to check them out. Those links are on the Canvas page as well, by the way, so you can find it at any given moment looking for the event tonight. All right, let's get started. So, of our 5 guest faculty members this year, I'm crazy about their work. I delight in their work, and I have for years. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have invited them to teach at the conference. Beyond their work, of the 5, one of them I've known well for years and years. 2 of them I only met face-to-face for the first time last night, and 2 I know a little bit. The 2 readers tonight are the ones I know a little bit, although our first reader, Paul Disicki, the leader of our memoir workshop, probably thinks we've never met. I can't quite see his face, but I'm guessing that's true. And I'm not telling this story, just so you know, I'm not telling this story because I'm proud of it. I'm telling it because it's funny. And also because if it ever happens to you, I want you to know that you are not alone. The first thing to know is that I don't usually get starstruck. I can go out to dinner or whatever with my heroes and usually just talk to them like actual people. But every now and then, there was a dinner at the Folger Shakespeare Library when Deborah Eisenberg won the Penn Faulkner Award 5-6 years ago now. She's been one of my favorite authors since forever. And I got invited to the dinner and we just talked. We just talked about Twilight of the Superheroes or whatever her most recent book was. And it was great. But her husband, some of you, it's a name some of you will recognize. He's had an amazing career. I have no idea why he was at the dinner, except that the food would be good. But he was editor of The New Yorker for a while, a famous stage and screen actor named Wallace Shawn. Now, Wallace Shawn was in a movie you may have seen called The Princess Bride. He's been in many films, but he's most famous probably for his role in The Princess Bride. He's the leader of this group of 3 brigands, and his character is famous for saying the single word, inconceivable, just like that. And when I saw him at the dinner, that word pronounced like that filled my entire brain. Right? I wanted to go and talk to him. I wanted to go talk to him about editing The New Yorker and the movie, Hollywood, whatever. But that word like filled my brain. And so what I did instead was I just grinned at him like an idiot from across the room for an hour. That's what I did instead. So there's a little bit of context. Every now and then my brain will short out. So more to the point of this evening's reading. There's this huge writing conference that you may have heard of, really big, like 15,000, 20,000 people some years, called AWP. And I had never been to it until my first book came out. And at that point, I'd been living abroad in France and Peru and China for like 15 years. So I didn't really know any American writers personally. I knew a few of them through email, but I hadn't met anybody. I just knew them through their work and at best from their author photo. So I'm at AWP that year in this huge convention hotel. Chicago, was it Chicago? It might've been Chicago. And I'm going up this huge, long escalator, the kind where like the up and the down are separated by like 30 yards of empty space, right? And so I'm going up the escalator, and halfway up, I look over at the down escalator and I recognize Paul Lesicki, who I've never met, right? But I recognize him from his author photo from maybe Lawn Boy or maybe from the AWP program itself, if you were speaking that year, Paul. And I was so happy to recognize someone. Again, I've been living out of the country for 15 years. I was so happy to recognize an author whose work I liked that my brain shorted out. And I found myself waving at him, like enthusiastically, across the chasm between escalators. Why did I do that? Like there was no, why do we wave at people to say, hi, I'm here, we know each other, now you know that I'm here, right? Except we didn't know each other at all. And I'm waving at him across the chasm. A moment later, my brain sort of engaged again, right? It re-engaged. And it was, so I'm just still waving and my brain is going, why? And he's far away and has no idea who I am. And so my hand comes down sheepishly, just as Paul's hand went up. So now he's waving at me for no reason. He has no idea who I am. And what I did next, not proud of this, what I did next was I was just so overwhelmed with all of the things that I turned away, got to the top of the escalator and walked away as quickly as I could. And I never saw Paul again until yesterday. That's the end of that story. Paul Lesicki is the author of 6 books, including later, My Life at the Edge of the World, The Narrow Door, a memoir of friendship, and Unbuilt Projects. Actually, I'm going to interrupt there because the bio Paul sent to us doesn't mention any of the following things about that first book that I listed. It doesn't mention the following lists that it was on. I had to do my own research. Are you ready? Here are the lists that that book made. NPR's Best Book of 2020, Electric Lit's Favorite Nonfiction Books of 2020, Oprah Magazine's Best LGBTQ Books of 2020, The Washington Post 10 Books to Read in March, Entertainment Weekly's 20 Must-Reads for March, Harper's Bazaar's Best LGBTQ Books of 2020, The Philadelphia Inquirer's Best Book of Spring 2020, a Rumpus Book Club selection. The list goes on and on and on. His work has also appeared in The Advocate, The Atlantic, Conjunctions, The New York Times, Plowshares, and elsewhere. His awards include fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the NEA, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, where he served on the writing committee since the year 2000. He has taught at Cornell, NYU, Sarah Lawrence, the University of Texas at Austin, and elsewhere, and he currently teaches in the MFA program in creative writing at Rutgers University Camden and lives in Brooklyn. Please help me welcome Paul Lesicki.
Thank you, Roy. It's so wonderful to be here. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I'm really excited about this event, and I'm excited about reading with Idra. My students know that I'm extremely nervous because I'm reading from brand new work. I've been working for about 6 years on a book about my father. And for most of those 6 years, the work has felt really amorphous. There came a point last year when I decided that the thing to do would be to write down every single memory I had of my great father, my late father, and do what I could to enact or meditate on those memories. And somehow within the last, I'd say, month or so, this book, which probably already had a spine, became more apparent to me. I mean, I think I told my students that I think I was in a position where I was in a place where I could see that spine. So the book that I thought might have still been a couple of years in the future might be much closer to me. And that's simultaneously exciting and filling me with anxiety. But I'm really, really excited to share with you the opening. This might change in the editing process, and I'm still very close to it. But I think that might be all you need to know. I'll just say it's a book about the poison of being overworked in this culture through the lens of my father, who took that poison home to his family. And it's also about my effort to find a way to live against all that through music, whether it was playing music or writing music, or even through God, as weird as that sounds. So I think that's it. This is for my students and interns today who were so terrific in helping to bring energy to class. So thanks again. The inner Anton of me. The piano lives at the center of our house in a dark room we call the hearth room. We might as well call it the heart room, as it functions as the heart of the house. I can't walk by the piano, an old upright, with a worn crescent on the tip of the brass pedal, without putting my hands on its keys. By doing that, I'm making something happen to the paneled walls, to the wires, to my fingers, which get stronger as if I'm squeezing a rubber ball. Usually, everything happens to me, as it does to my father, my mother, and everyone else in this house. It is the one time I don't feel caged, like the blue plastic mouse whose loss is someone's win in Mousetrap. I imagine the sound I'm making is a human voice, a voice more adult than the high, uncertain voice that comes out of my 9-year-old mouth. I imitate the songs I hear on the radio, as well as the ones I've learned in church, and unbroken passages come to me fully formed, as if their chord progressions are my second language. If I hear an A, I play an A. There's no effort in the translation, as there often is when someone tries to hold a conversation with me. I never once think of the music I play as God music, maybe because when I'm lost inside it and dreaming, I close up some distance every now and then. To name God is to be separate from God. When my mother hears me playing, she says, "This was my mother's piano." And when she says it in that rueful voice, as she has 100 times before, she means, "You are talking to the dead." Or better, the dead are talking to you. You must measure up. This means lessons, though I am just fine with figuring out this instrument on my own. Lessons already conjures up hard work and evaluation, all the things that seem to make my father the joyless, scary man he is. Already the fun is gone. Goodbye, fun. You were good to me once. Nothing in our house is real unless it's tough, even though that frame of mind often makes us weary and disappointed in ourselves, which might be why so much of our yard is full of half-finished projects, used motor oil in gallon jugs, a sidewalk that crumbles along the edge, leading to nowhere. We just can't do it. We can't do what other people seem to do with zest and play. And that's why we have to work 3 times as hard. It is already an old song, part of a junkyard of pop songs that came before the Beatles. People are tired of being soothed. Racial tension, brutal war, fires in Camden, Detroit, Asbury Park, protest in the streets. People are crying enough. Even I know that from looking at the news. But this song wants to believe in a world in which it's still possible to sing Never My Love, which might be why my father doesn't snap off the car radio as we drive down Route 561 to our little shore house on the lagoon, the only place where my mother, brothers, and I are happy. It's a sweet song tinged with melancholy, even though it thinks it's about love, spending one's whole life with one other person. I think it's sad because it's already old-fashioned, too pretty and clean at a time in which all the new songs are about offering oneself to darkness, to poison, to following a rattlesnake as it heads toward the woods. The singer seems to know all that, but still can't stop himself from wishing. It makes me feel the difference between last year and this, 8 years old and 9. A lot has gone wrong in that time. I'm embarrassed by how much it soothes me, by how much I need soothing. In the church of no kneeling, my father kneels on the polished concrete floor. To our left and right, people are smiling, joking, gossiping, fidgeting, folding and unfolding the church bulletin into squares. Though my father is right next to us, he's in a darker pocket of time when church was all about punishment, a theater of discipline. He leans into the back of the chair in front of him, head down, lips pressed into his folded hands, which are cracked and red from digging up the yard for a sprinkler system. He misses that old church. Maybe if he wants it long enough, hard enough, it will come back, and this half-round conversation pit of a sanctuary will turn into what it wants to be, a restaurant or a nightclub. What has he done? Why is he hurting himself and out in the open like this? People look away as they do when somebody has a secret and he thinks he's doing a better job of containing it than he knows. It never occurs to him that he's made a god out of struggle. If he wanted to, he could get off his knees, put his arms around our shoulders, and look into our faces as if he thought they were beautiful. A young woman with a soft face and playful eyes finger picks an acoustic guitar too big for her body. She's at the head of the church behind the lectern. She tosses dark hair over her bare shoulder, teaching us a new antiphon, like dry lands searching for water. Most of us aren't singing though, just an odd voice here and there. Everyone is too mortified, even if their faces are neutral. She might as well be asking us to embarrass ourselves, to bare ourselves in public, such as kissing someone, even the stranger next to us. We'd rather she be our surrogate. We'd rather she do the work of sending out our message to God, though that voice reminds us of pop music, half Joni Mitchell, half Karen Carpenter. Its quality has nothing to do with a broken heart, which isn't to say it isn't sad. The sound is pure belief, and maybe we're frightened of belief because belief demands something of us. Its hunger isn't so easily satisfied. We'd have to leave our houses, live with the poor on the west side of town, put all our vanity aside. Nobody I know is brave like that, especially my father, who wouldn't give up a cent because he came from nothing and believes the government is going to take our 2 houses away. Instead, we shift and jitter and cough and scratch our ankles. So much for heaven. Our foreheads burn. The backs of our shirts go sour and damp, as if we've been caught in the woods with our pants all the way down. But she isn't only about demands. I wouldn't be so mesmerized if that were the only story of her. Maybe her voice is a way out of here. Midway through the communion hymn, I pull my mother's bell sleeve and whisper, "Could you put this in your handbag?" She puts her damp head close to mine and asks me to say it again. "I want this," I say. "Can you take it?" And pass her the missalette, the pamphlet of songs and prayers I want to know better. I know it's a little bit of a sin, which is why I won't risk stealing it myself in plain sight around adults. Adults expect children to be bad. Children exist for adults to control and punish and put in line. But my pretty mother with the dark red lipstick, she can get away with crimes. She drops the missalette into her handbag with all the finesse of a Natasha from Rocky and Bullwinkle. She snaps it shut and we finish the song, holding on to the final note. Out in the car, while looking at its notes and chord symbols, all A minors and E minors, I imagine a combination of what I've just heard and making that music my own. It feels like the essence of love, my mother breaking the rules for me. I even forget I usually get car sick while in the back seat, especially after that trip to Luray Caverns when I couldn't stop from throwing up. The back of my head is cold while the forehead goes hot, very hot. My body feels too small for the organs inside. If I'm not careful, these feelings will break through my bones. Corvettes, the stationary section, 10 aisles away from my mother. The need is awful, immediate, as if I'm caught in some riptide of my own making and it's pulling me out to sea and I can't get back to my family on the beach. That camel-colored pencil case on the bottom shelf. Why do I need it? Why is it singing my name like that? There's no time for thinking or a pause. It's time to be brave and make sure no one is looking, slip it under my jacket, making a hot ham sandwich of it between my rib cage and left sleeve. I walk out expertly over the ridged rubber that triggers the automatic door. I'm in the back, having stashed the pencil case under the passenger seat. In a while, I'll feel empty, meaningless, as I always do after I've taken something. I won't examine what's appealing and well-made about it. I won't appreciate its intricate stitching, or what it took to sew its black zipper in a factory. Did it hurt to do that? Was it dangerous? I won't even like it, frankly. I won't even have feelings for it. I'll think about tossing it out the window when my mother's listening to the radio and think about other cars driving over it. Tire marks, the tearing apart. It's the disobedience that matters, the little wail of it. It's the flood of pleasurable chemicals, though I don't yet know that's what they're called, that soothe me, that tell me I'm doing what I can to take care of myself, though it's bad, very bad. I'll die if I don't do it, and yet I know I'm going to be caught. I have a smell of dirty hair about me, even though I've just taken a bath. Who would want to live like that? When I play music, I'm anchored to the floor. I'm not pulled out to sea, not sucked out to some invisible point where I can't make my way back to the beach. I'm telling my hands which way to go. I make the rules. Everyone has to be the boss of something. My father's childhood, outhouse out back, vineyard out back. My grandfather making wine from the grapes in the basement, barrels of red wine in the basement. My grandfather eating a handful of salt. Why? Injury at the wire mill where he works. Bare leg, rod on fire, going through the bare leg, bone exposed, gray muscle, groan. Horrible job, horrible boss who gives him 10 minutes to put on a bandage and sends him back out in the line. Boss who wouldn't know how to smile if he were presented with a naked woman. Days of belittling, bullying, which he carries home with him and takes out in his family, who cower when they see him coming. Pouring toxic liquid on the wound, bleach, kerosene, as if the only way to heal the wound is to punish the wound, to pull apart the skin even further. He can't stop from punishing his body. If he can't be the boss of something, he'll be the boss of his body, poisoning it back toward health. Storm seeker, chaos maker, drunk, louse, disappearer, philanderer, nose picker, shit stirrer. Fathered by his children, though my father never puts it like that. He says he was lucky to have such a father, insists on simplicity, on a world of logic and order in which problems are given to us to be solved. Pending developments today, Alex Lesicki, 40, of 409 Filbert Street, was detained Sunday night by the police for safekeeping. He was taken to police headquarters by motorcycle officer Bernhard. Police say he had been drinking. It is alleged that Lesicki went to the home of a neighbor and there struck a daughter of the family, who is said to have stolen his watch. Lesicki is said to have flourished a shotgun in the excitement. The gun was later found by the police, unloaded, at his home. The owner denied having had it and asserted that he only used it in hunting season. At other times, he claimed it was kept safe on account of his children playing about the house. Pouring his father's wine down the toilet, the sink, the gutter, to draw his father closer, even as his father pounds him for the waist. But the worst of it, watching his father coming up the street in rags, soiled in the front and back of his pants, mumbling to himself, in sight of the neighbors who stare at him openly, too accustomed to him by now to be aghast. The father is a wild animal. My father needs to find a way to soothe the wild animal in his father and in himself, lest to tear him apart. For the final years of his life, my grandfather repeats his final words, his only words, 12 hours a day, as if all he has left is prayer. Jesus, Mary, Jesus, Mary, Jesus, Mary, Jesus, Mary, Jesus. Joseph, the name of the Father, nowhere to be heard. I'm sitting with my mother at the kitchen table when Mrs. Ott, who dusts and sweeps for us once a week, walks into the room with something behind her back, as if she has something I don't have. I don't know why she looks right at me when she's never said my name or said hello. Her eye is usually trained on the dust by the heating registers, the smudges around the light switch plate. She licks her lips as if she can taste dirt and doesn't know how it ended up in her mouth. Mrs. Ott has disapproval written into the lines in her forehead, her hands, her white socks, her white legs, her chunky shoes. Her hair pulled so tight off her scalp that it lifts her eyebrows, makes her back teeth sensitive. She behaves like someone who's been told she's ugly since childhood. And rather than fight that assessment, she digs in, giving the ugliest she can to anyone. That is her protest, and she always wins. It would be different if she didn't live in our neighborhood, in a house not so much different from ours. Money has been lost. Or does she say, laundered? She spent too much on washing machines? Her husband? Gambling? He's gone now. She does what she can to keep her house from being taken away. I was moving the dust mop under the bed and I seemed to have come up with some treasure. She sees right into the meat of me, all the pink and red of it, the juice on the plate. She knows when she sees a stolen thing, in the manner of someone who's probably stolen a few things herself, maybe things more expensive and personal than pencil cases. A legitimate thing wouldn't be hidden beneath the bed, in the dust, over the grommets in the wood floor. Has she already gone through my drawers, taken inventory of my socks, my toys, my underwear? Has she looked for spots? My bowels feel nervous, as if it's snowing inside me. a storm trying to get out. It's very nice, says my mother calmly, tilting it to the light as if thinking about all the beautiful things that could fill its pockets. I wonder where that came from. It's an awfully elegant contraption for some useless pencils, Mrs. Ott says out the corner of her mouth, enjoying the dirty game of it. You don't like pencils? My mother says, frowning, truly alarmed now. Well, I just thought you'd want to know a little more about what's inside your house and all its treasures. Mrs. Ott walks out into the driveway with her check in hand. My mother doesn't know, or does she? If she does, why doesn't she say a word to me about it? Is it my face still red as meat? My trembling hand? If only she said, is something wrong? I'm sure I'd stop. If I stopped for anyone, it would be my mother. I stopped for her. My father's work badge features a black and white photo of him protected by a plastic sleeve backed by a metal clip. His black rimmed glasses, his white starched shirt, the flat top crew cut, so perfectly shaped that Mike Pesolano, the barber, must use custom combs. He's arranged his face to intimidate, to say, I don't belong here. I'm much better than here. I tell him he looks a little like Frankenstein, by which I mean Boris Karloff's version of the monster. But in truth, the monster looks friendlier, more vulnerable than my father. The monster wants a friend, wants someone to touch him as he tilts his head toward the violin. It's not in my nature to be nasty, though sometimes I touch meanness as if it's an electric shock, a charge that pings me alive. My father's face stays scary, impassive, exactly as it is on the work badge. Sometimes it seems that nothing I say could hurt him, but that doesn't mean I stop trying. Maybe one day I'll land on the right word and feel ashamed about it, just awful. Daddy, I'll say, and he'll push me away. His reaction will hurt like a wound between my knee and my foot, but at the same time, I'll know I exist to him. Work wasn't supposed to be like this. Work was supposed to stimulate him, appreciate and reward him. When he came up with a new idea, work was supposed to encourage him to do better, to go to the moon, literally, with the rocket he helps design. Instead, work has given him a lonely life in a frozen suburb without sidewalks. People don't walk anywhere. He is a man without friends, no community, American dream. When he drives up Borton Landing Road up the driveway to RCA, the flaming rod spears his leg. The radar dome hulks at the tree line as if on the set of a science fiction film. Though he doesn't work in a wire mill, he stepped into a factory that calls itself La Plant, where he makes a hell of a lot more money, yes, but the stakes are much higher, where his coworkers steal ideas from each other, form alliances that exclude him, and hiding is key, hiding from the government, hiding from spies, the possibility of the phone line being tapped at home. He has given cold sweat to his company in return for the threat of being laid off, which blows through his night like snow, collecting in the corners of his mouth and eyes. The voice of his boss rams into his dreams. It laughs at his weaknesses, tongue swabbing his ear like a wandering dog off the street. The inside of his body is a trash can, a garbage truck, a lit match in front of his mouth, the fumes making the flame go 4-5 inches high. No wonder he throws up all the rough stuff he's held inside. I'm going to skip forward. There's a little passage here about my father in the war. And so this next section, the last section I'm going to read, is informed by his coming home from war on leave. He says he sends 95% of his paycheck to his family, puts the rest in a savings account. There's some meaning to be found in the sacrifice of it, the growling of his empty stomach as he goes to bed hungry, the walking to the post office as he sends off the money order. He wonders if that money will make them love him more, but he already knows better than that. There is nothing special about him, nothing precious. He and his siblings have been led to think that his whole life. He does what a good immigrant son is expected to do. A lean life hardens a family, which might explain why he keeps his hopes low when he's sent back home to Allentown on leave. He doesn't expect anyone to be at the train station. They're not that kind of family anyway. They never were. But maybe it's wrong to expect nothing. Maybe someone will be there to surprise him. He steps off the train, rallies the confidence to lift his head and look around. The platform is packed. People with big smiles, people with welcome home signs, people with pastry bags stained around the sides and edges. He decides to smile too until there's no one left on the platform to notice it. He takes the long walk home, over the Jordan Creek Bridge, past St. John's Church, where his Aunt Tetka is probably in the second row pew for daily mass. When his mother opens the front door, her eyes deaden as if she's face to face with a stranger who wants something from her that she doesn't have it in herself to give. She starts crying. Is it because he looks like a man to her now, with a bitter face? And she lost him to the United States before he was ever hers. He had no idea she even cared like that. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for being here tonight.
Paul, that was extraordinary. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was absolutely superb. Very, very much obliged. Wow. And from there, our next reader is Idra Novey, leader of one of our two fiction workshops. I've met Idra once or twice before, not even counting escalators. I remember I crashed a dinner held in her honor after a reading she did at George Mason one year. And the reason I crashed that dinner, I mean, I didn't crash it, right? I just wasn't on the original invite list, was because I wanted to talk to her about her work, but in this case, not about the fiction that she is here teaching. There's a sentence here that I listen to this fucking sentence. Are you ready? The world's continual breathing is what we hear and call silence. That's a sentence. Here's another one. Let's see. What I want is to live of, not in, right? Of. What I want is to live of that initial and primordial something that was what made some things reach the point of aspiring to be human. Here's one more. I, the pronoun, yeah, I is merely one of the world's instantaneous spasms. Okay, one more. Here we go. You ready? How opulent this silence is. It is the accumulation of centuries. It is the silence of the cockroach looking. The world looks at itself in me. Everything looks at everything. Everything experiences the other. In this desert, things know things. All right, so those are all sentences, some of you might recognize them, from one of the strangest and most wonderful novels of the 20th century, a book called The Passion According to G.H. by a Brazilian writer named Clarice Lispector. It's as close as you can get to having no plot whatsoever, no present or very, very little present tense action. But it is riveting for 250 pages. And if you put a gun to my head and said all of 20th century literature was going to disappear forever except for one author's, and I had to decide which author, I'd think about it for a minute, but I'd probably pick Lispector. And The Passion According to G.H. was the first book of hers that I read. And the reason I could read it is because of Idra Novey. I read and speak and write a couple of languages, but not Portuguese, which is the language Lispector wrote in. I learned a few words, right? I learned hello and goodbye and thank you. And the butterfly does not drink beer. That's an actual sentence. The Duolingo thought it was important for me to learn, right? The butterfly. A borboleta não bebe cerveja, right? Why? Why did I learn that sentence? Never in my life. I don't remember my kids' blood types, but I remember that sentence in Portuguese. Point being, my only point of access to this crazy book by this extraordinary writer, Clarice Lispector, was through another extraordinary writer, Idra Novey, who translated The Passion into English. So from the very beginning, I was grateful to her for that. Here, I am grateful for her other gifts, for her fiction and what she is bringing to workshop, and I hope the reading tonight, and her poetry as well. She has a fantastic poem that's a broadside on the wall in the Lit House. Paul has one downstairs, and I think you saw that on the tour. Idra's, if I remember right, is in the break room on the second floor, so you wouldn't have seen it on the tour, but it's very, very good. That is the result of a visit she made to Washington College, where she saved someone's life. Now, I wasn't there. I haven't heard the whole story even, but I'm somehow certain that the moral of the story that I haven't heard is that if you're ever in mortal danger, call Idra. All right, that's the moral.
Tall order, tall order.
Yeah, don't give out your cell phone after this. Idra Novey is the author of the novel Those Who Knew, a finalist for the 2019 Clark Fiction Prize, a New York Times Editor's Choice, and a Best Book of the Year, with over a dozen media outlets doing competition to Paul then, including NPR, Esquire, BBC, Kirkus Review, and O Magazine. Her first novel, Ways to Disappear, received the 2017 Sammy Rohr Prize, the 2016 Brooklyn Eagles Prize, and was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize for First Fiction. Her poetry and fiction have themselves been translated into a dozen languages, and she's written for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, New York Magazine, and the Paris Review. She is the recipient of awards from the NEA, Poets and Writers, the Penn Translation Fund, and the Poetry Foundation. Her latest book, a co-translation called Lean Against This Late Hour, spectacular title, is currently a finalist for the 2021 Penn Award for Poetry and Translation. She currently teaches fiction at Princeton University. Please help me welcome Idra Novey.
Thank you. What a lovely intro. And James put it in the note. My first novel, Ways to Disappear, was the community read at Washington College. So I came and read, and it was it the whole first year students who read it? And I got to meet with different groups, and I just fell in love with the students at Washington College. They were such thoughtful readers and gracious and attentive and insightful. And to go around and meet with them was really such an honor and a joy. Yes, I'm a big fan of Washington College. And at that time, among the swag, which I noticed is no longer there, there was a squishy rubber house. James, do you remember that? Yes. Anyway, I think I still have that somewhere. Oh, you still have that little house? Anyone who's putting in swag requests, I have to say that it's like the Rose Cottage. It's like the house. It's a magical little mini house. My children were small at that point, and they were very taken with this fetching miniature of the house. Thank you, Roy and Paul. What heartbreaking exercise. I'm really so moved to read this and to read the full book now that it's close to having a spine and in the world. I just thought some of the lines we were put, people putting them up, God is struggle. It was just, and how your use of restraint of sort of like taking the moment up to its sort of like most devastating point and then just letting it ring almost like a note on a piano. It felt like there was something kind of musical, how you would play the song and then hit the note and let it just ring in the room. It was really stunning. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to be reading something tonight. I was going to read from Those Who Knew, which is my second novel. Came out paperback in 2020. But I've done some readings from it recently. And this story that I wrote that came out in the Yale Review came out last week. And I thought, since I'm teaching short story writing, that maybe it would be a fun thing to share with you all, students who are generating new writing, a short story. So this story is called The Glacier. And one other small thing I'll share with you before I read. One, I'm so excited to have Avery, our amazing intern, and my fantastic students. I so enjoyed being with them today. Thank you all for coming to hear your professors read. This story, The Glacier, I was asked to talk about it today, in fact, with students at Santa Monica College who are reading in a short story class. And one of them had a read on it, and I started thinking about sharing the same story tonight with all of you. And this was a graduate class, so they were graduate students. And one of the students said this story struck a chord with him because he was thinking he identified with the children in this story. And it's a story about climate collapse and about parents taking their children to see something that's no longer there in the Andes Mountains. My husband is from Chile, and we have a lot of family and friends there, and I lived in Chile for a long time. So this story is based on, it's not real, but it's based on going back to the Andes Mountains with friends and seeing sort of the effects of climate change there due to some gypsum mines in the Andes Mountains. And so the student was saying that he really identified with these children whose parents assumed that the beauty from their childhood would still be there for their children, to show their children. And it was really powerful to hear that, because I wrote the story and identified with parents. And so I wonder, for all of you listening, except for fellow faculty, if you too will identify with the children in this story, and the sense that you have inherited the earth in such a way that those of us who are older weren't really the custodians of it that we should have been, that we aren't bequeathing you the earth that we should be, and the beautiful places that some of us got to experience may not be there in the same way, with the water at the same height, when you go to see them. So that was what the story was about. It's not an elegy, but there's an elegiac element to it. So this is The Glacier. We were camping in the Andes, one of 6 families on a trip with a collective horde of 16 children. Each car ride, the kids switched vehicles. They often swapped their sun hats as well, and I didn't pay much attention to who scrambled into our car. Or I didn't unless they got too loud or did something that had to be stopped, as with the boy currently seated behind me, who kept pressing his toes into the back of my seat. For several hours, we'd been making our way up a winding, increasingly narrow road along a cliff. There was no guardrail, and our car kept rocking ship-like with each turn. The mission of our 6-family caravan was to swim in the hot springs we found on this mountain once before. I was certain we should have seen the hot springs by now, and my husband Gustavo, who was driving, thought so as well. He guessed we must be remembering how far up we'd driven when we found the hot springs the last time, which had been 12 years ago, before we'd had children. Watch out for those monsters, I told him, pointing through the windshield at a cluster of particularly large rocks that had tumbled onto the road. I see them, Gustavo said with irritation, and I apologized. I knew he was eminently capable of spotting a giant rock in front of us without any anxious warnings from me. But what had happened to the hot springs? It didn't seem possible they could all be gone in just over a decade. These chaotic trips in the Andes were an annual event. I knew the other couples through Gustavo, who'd been coordinating the campsite reservations for 20 years. The trips often felt like a marital test, although I never regretted them once they ended. A Monday, trapped again in the grinding machinery of city life, I knew what I would enjoy recalling the children this morning in their bright pajamas, making rock sculptures behind the tents after breakfast, or the sight of them last night, perched on a log like a flock of birds, while I reheated some pasta for them over the campfire. I thought I had a good sense of the children by now, and yet when I turned around once more to ask the boy seated behind me to please keep his feet on the floor, I couldn't recall his name. He definitely belonged to Andres and Nora. His dark hair was chopped into the generic, unchanging haircut Nora had given all her sons since they were toddlers. He was fairly indistinguishable, with his bony knees poking out of blue athletic shorts. Other parents on this trip likely thought the same of my own sons and couldn't remember their names either, none of us being quite as invested in each other's offspring as we like to think we were invested. In fact, if one of our vehicles hit a rock and fell off the cliff, there was a good chance no adults in the car would be able to name every child plummeting with them down the mountainside. I was about to remark on this bleak possibility when the minivan ahead of us came to a halt. Paulina emerged from the driver's side, swinging her loose hair out of her face, and motioned to the van with a frown, flicking her fingers to show something had punctured the tire. Kids, stay away from the edge if you get out, I warned the passengers currently in our care, though they were already slamming their doors, and Gustavo was half out of the car as well, rushing over to join the other fathers. All 6 of the men began vying to make themselves useful in the replacing of the tire. A few of the mothers gathered with the pack as well. Nora, being one of the bolder ones, insisted on taking a role in the installation of the spare. Watching them through the windshield, I knew I had chosen yet again to be the resident loner. On these group trips, the other women no longer expected me to join them, and I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car now either, not with 50 pages left in the bulky novel I've been reading for over a month. I'd been determined to fit it into our glove compartment, hoping for a moment like this today when I could sneak in at least a few minutes of reading and being alone. 12 years ago, in our last group trip to this area in the Andes, we had showered under a small waterfall along the roadside. I was certain we should have reached it by now. Gustavo agreed the waterfall had been lower on this mountain, although the hot springs were the reason we were continuing higher, for our children to experience the wonder of those sudden pools, the water bubbling up from underground, steaming and reeking of sulfur. By the time the spare tire was installed, I'd gotten through enough pages to project a sense of calm as a new trio of children clambered into our car. Yet there was no feigning composure at the blasted ruin of the mountainside as we drove higher. I'd read online about the gypsum mining empire that had lobbied for access here. I hadn't realized they'd razed such massive areas out of existence. Entire slopes had been burned away, reduced to a uniformly flat, blackened expanse of ground-up stones and grimy, unnatural-looking gravel. There had been rumors the mining company had slashed a whole glacier in half, messing with the flow of far more meltwater than they admitted. Still, I'd assumed the damage must have been contained to a limited area. Last night at the campfire, I'd agreed when Paulina said the government surely wouldn't have allowed the mining company to move too many things around, not when all of Santiago drank from reservoirs fed by those glaciers. Paulina's reasoning had seemed not just hopeful but conclusive. How could it not be, with 12 reasonably informed adults nodding along with her, sipping beers together in camping chairs under a gloriously clear, star-riddled sky? Yet even the goats were gone now. None of the big rangy herds we'd seen on the last trip remained. We'd seen hundreds of them at this altitude then, gathering wherever meltwater from the ice shelves had trickled down and formed networks of streams. Goats had stood together grazing all over them, blocking the road or clustered on grassy areas that were gone now, too. The wind was pressing harder against my side of the car, rocking us more wildly than before. The light, too, felt sharper and less forgiving as I squinted through the windshield. After replacing the tire, we were now advancing with the deliberate slowness of the penitent. Every rock and hole felt like a scolding for having indulged in our naive optimism. In the back seat, our new crew of passengers wanted something to snack on, but the previous passenger had finished the last treats that Oscar and Miguel had jammed into the pockets of the doors. "But you must keep something hidden in here for emergencies," said Maria Jose, the oldest and most indignant of our current trio. "You don't have anything, even in your glove compartment?" "I'm sorry," I told her. "If we had anything edible left, I'd give it to you, I swear." I opened the glove compartment to show her it contained nothing but car manuals and the bulky novel I brought, filling what now seemed a conspicuously large amount of space. "Are you sure there isn't anything under the seats?" Gustavo asked, as if even he assumed I should be able to produce some form of sustenance for these children if I wanted to badly enough. Meanwhile, the road kept narrowing with each turn around the mountain, my dizziness tipping now into nausea. To keep driving higher made no sense at all. And why, collectively, had we had so many children? "I really think we better turn around," I said to Gustavo. "Could you flash the lights or stop the car?" We'd lost cell service some time ago, and there was no way to discuss things unless we brought all 6 vehicles to a halt. But Gustavo didn't want to stop. Without turning his head from the road, he insisted the mining damage would have to end eventually, and we'd driven all this way. "The kids are ravenous," I said. "We at least need to stop and see who has snacks left." Gustavo offered no answer to this, just gripped the wheel. More intently, and continued with the procession. When the van ahead of us came to another halt, I scrambled out as fast as the children. Before Gustavo could get out of the car and interject, I asked Paulina where she was ready to turn around to give up, to admit the hot springs were gone. "It never occurred to me they could just be gone," Paulina says, "but they are just like that. No more hot springs." She shook her head. On the other side of the minivan, I heard what sounded like someone vomiting, and Paulina explained that one of the kids had gotten carsick. It was Andres and Nora's son in the blue athletic shorts who'd been pushing into my seat. Doubled over on the roadside, he was ejecting an astonishing quantity of clear liquid, which was now splashing over the dry ground. A puddle had begun to widen around his feet. Maybe the altitude was the cause. Maybe all the sharp zigzags of mining roads cutting through the stripped face of the Cordillera. Whatever had gone wrong in his body, the results just kept pouring forth. I watched as stunned and motionless as everyone else. It was a shocking rush of liquid, so abundant and seemed to be jetting up from a source under the ground beneath him, rising up through his scrawny legs, turning his body into an unbidden conduit. I just saw the time. Roy, should we stop? Because we're supposed to end at 7:54.
We are absolutely not supposed to stop until you're done reading. That is
Okay,
when
there's
we'll
just 2
stop.
pages, but I know the students have had a long day. Okay, all right.
Please continue and take your time. Like,
I just
let's
wanted
stick
to be
with the sentence.
respectful. Students, I'm almost at the end. I can't remember his name, I murmured to Gustavo. He drew near and said he wasn't sure either. I looked around at the growing gathering of adults, but didn't see Andres and Nora, who had been at the front of the caravan. Somebody needed to step forward to console their son until they got here. The boy was heaving now, releasing such bewildering quantity of liquid that the puddle was now trickling toward our feet. And yet no one in our half circle of 7 or so parents had moved toward him. It's like we were trapped in a spell, compelling us to remain exactly where we had stopped, watching this poor kid vomit alone, more coming up each time, the puddle spreading faster over the cracked, dusty surface of the road. I wanted to think my inaction was not due to pettiness about this boy pressing his restless feet so many times against the back of my seat. I like to think of myself as inherently decent, a person eager to step forward when it was necessary. But if that was true, why was I standing meekly next to my spouse while this other family's child went on retching? My God, what is going on? Nora finally rushed up, stepping in her open-toed sandals into the puddle around her son. As soon as she touched his bony back, the boy took an audible gulp of breath, which seemed to bring his incomprehensible purging to an end at last. Or not yet, as he didn't stand up. He stayed hunched over, coughing and gripping his knees. To avoid the indictment in Nora's gaze, I stared down with dread at the bile about to reach my feet, and then it arrived, a warm, awful squish against my toes. Before I could react, 2 small hands pressed against the back of my legs. It was Oka, hoping to be held. As I lifted my son onto my hip, something about the arrangement of his face took me by surprise. I knew the rest of him. I knew his short fingers and shaggy brown hair, the source of the scar on his wrist. I knew who had given him the hand-me-down t-shirt he was wearing with its half-submerged hippo as a gift to his older brother 4 years ago. And yet Oscar's small round face still startled me. The unabashed need of his open mouth, all his tiny milk teeth inside it, waiting to be pushed loose and supplanted. We'll figure it out, don't worry, we'll get back, I told my child, who didn't reply. He just turned his face open-mouthed toward the vastness of the ground-up, ash-colored particles behind us, covering the entirety of the mountainside.
Idra, that was magnificent. I'm so glad that you kept going. I'm so glad you took your time and let us sit with those sentences there at the end. And I generally hesitate to make predictions, but that story is absolutely going to win the award for most vomit, I think, of all the stories. I'm really pretty sure. No, that was magnificent. Thank you.
A writer has to aspire to something. I want to win the annual Upchuck Award. Yes.
I'm surprised that like anybody else is even going to compete. I don't see why they would. No, that was magnificent. Both of you, thank you so much. I think what we will cut short for the evening are my questions, which were going to be radically less interesting than those 2 readings, which were absolutely magnificent. And instead just say thank you. That was spectacular. Those 2 pieces were so very different and yet both so resonant and layered and sort of thorough of their exploration of the thing that they chose, right? The thing that the material that the story chose, or what the story chose as its own heart. That's the way it feels sometimes, right? Like the material chooses what its own heart is going to be, and then we can listen or not. And if we don't, then it's a bad story. And if we do, then it's a good story, right? That's how that seems to work so often. But thank you both very, 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 very much for that. That was magnificent. What the students have up next is literary trivia night. And I wish you all good luck. There's the link in the the chat to make it easy for anyone to get there that needs to. I wish you good luck in scoring the swag of your choice. There's Justin luring all of you on like the Pied Piper of trivia. Was there one of those? And once again, Idra, Paul, thank you so very much.